King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. And as always, it's a great honor for me to be here with you in such capacity and to be able to share the strange nature of all the things the Most High has led me to in discernment and revelation. And I greatly appreciate your fellowship and just the charity that you have shown to me and supported and stood by me in all these years and taking a stance on truth and declaring yourself also as a seeker of lost paradise. And so I'm grateful to be joined with you in fellowship this evening. I will be continuing the theme of the prophecy of the 10 kings, and specific in story, I'll be focused upon the interaction of Esau and Nimrod, and also of how the garments, the sacred relics, the garments of power, and also the staff of authority, the rod of wonder, were restored back to Adam's bloodline. And for those that are familiar with the story or have listened to me as I've elaborated upon this theme, initially Adam had been giving these items when he was established as prophet, priest, and king in the order of Melchizedek in paradise, and that the church of the firstborn, Eden, that he was ordained to rule there over what would be, well, humanity before our fall and our entrance into this world and our being placed under the authority of death, and that he ordained into this same order and passed on what would be these sacred relics to Enoch, and Enoch gave them to Methuselah, and Methuselah passed them on to Noah, and Noah gave them over to Shem, and Shem passed them on to Abraham. But actually, sorry, I'm talking about the teachings. But with regard to these, the garments of power and the rod of wonder, Ham had stolen them from Noah. And so, even though the ordination of the order of Melchizedek was passed on to Shem and to Abraham, the relics were not restored back to their bloodline until the time of Esau. And that was because Ham had stolen them from the ark, and they had been hidden and veiled by his family for certain untold amounts of time between Ham and Cush, and then they were given over to Nimrod. And Nimrod utilized them to establish what was the New World Order in his life and time, and that he had become so prideful and so vain, much like Satan in his rebellion against the Most High, that Nimrod is also not only a name but a title, and it means the rebellious one, and that he had gotten cocky so much so that he achieved a plan to enter into heaven or to breach the gates of heaven and then to send up a barrage of arrows. He would have them return with blood upon them, saturating them and staining them, soaking them with blood before ever launching them into the heavens. And he was going to dupe his followers into believing that he had successfully achieved the murder of God and the celestial angels. And then he would announce himself as ruler of both the earth and then also the heavens. And because of his plot, in similarity to Satan, when iniquity was found within him and jealousy swept him so much that he was going to try to overthrow the dominion of the sun, that Nimrod, in similarity, was humbled, but in different manner. And because he was in physical form, he was forced to endure great pain. And I'll explain the story of how all this unfolded, but this is what we will be getting into this evening. And for those that did not hear the first show on the prophecy of the 10 kings, as well as the 7 ages spoken of in the war scroll, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the wars of the sons of light against the sons of darkness, I'll share with you a few passages before actually getting into the narrative of this story. And we'll begin with just a couple of portions from the Dead Sea Scrolls. That particular text is very long and precise with the back and forth nature of the contention between the children of promise and the children of Belial, which Belial means the wicked one. It says this: Then the sons of righteousness shall shine to all the ends of the world, continuing to shine forth until end of the appointed seasons of darkness. Then at the time appointed by God, his great excellence shall shine for all the times of eternity, for peace and blessing, glory and joy, and long life for all sons of light. On the day when the Kittim fall, there shall be a battle and horrible carnage before the God of Israel. For it is a day appointed by him from ancient times as a battle of annihilation for the sons of darkness. On that day, the congregation of the gods and the congregation of men shall engage one another, resulting in great carnage. And so we see that these battles, they lead up to what is the Battle of Armageddon. And when all the nations of Antichrist are formulated in conglomerate to go against Israel and God's chosen people. And so, one final passage from this manuscript, because it talks about, and I cover in the book that I'm working on now, The Vestures of Light and the Rod of Wonder, about how the contention, the enmity between the seed lines, that there is a prophecy of the 10 kings that will rise to power, and how the contention, the children of the devil vie against the children of God for dominion and power over the different ages of what is the second world age and this 7,000 years of history. And there are certain persons of the different bloodlines which do come to power and are given dominion over the other for certain time, and that this plays out in, again, the enmity between these two peoples and these two bloodlines. And so this is what is being mentioned in this particular verse. It says, in 3 lots the sons of light shall stand firm, so as to strike a blow at wickedness. And 3, the army of Belial shall strengthen themselves so as to force the retreat of the forces of light. And when the banners of the infantry cause their hearts to melt, then the strength of God will strengthen the hearts of the sons of light. And in the 7th lot, the great hand of God shall overcome Belial and all the angels of his dominion, and all the men of his forces shall be destroyed forever. And I do, without a doubt, believe that is where we are heading. Even now, that God's going to raise to power after the coming, reign of the Antichrist and the beast system, that Yahushua will return for the harvest at the end of days. But that certainly it does make mention of a time where the Antichrist will rule, and all the world will wonder at the beast, and the 10 regions of what is the United Nations, the 10 kings that give their power to the beast for a single hour of a single day, that they will have part to play in the Joel chapter 2, the destruction where it is a garden before them and then a destroyed wilderness afterwards, that the locust army released at the end of days, they also have part to play in the coming of the Antichrist as well. I'll read this particular portion to kind of set up the conflict that I'm talking about, and then I'll share with you the prophecy of the 10 kings in order to set what will be the narrative going forth of the contention between Nimrod and Esau. It says this: He gave him the clothes made of skins with which God had furnished Adam and Eve at the time of their leaving paradise. Cush himself had gained possession of them through Ham, and from Adam and Eve they had descended to Enoch, and from him to Methuselah and to Noah, and the last had taken them with him into the ark. When the inmates of the ark were about to leave their refuge, Ham stole the garments and kept them concealed. Finally, passing them on to his firstborn son Cush. Cush in turn hid them for many years, and when his son Nimrod reached his 20th year, he gave them to him. These garments had a wonderful property. He who wore them was both invincible and irresistible. The beasts and the birds of the woods fell down before Nimrod as soon as they caught sight of him, arrayed in them, and he was equally victorious in his combats with men. The source of his unconquerable strength was not known to them. They attributed to his personal prowess, and therefore they appointed him king over themselves. This was done after a conflict between the descendants of Cush and the descendants of Japheth, from which Nimrod emerged triumphant, having routed the enemy utterly with the assistance of a handful of warriors, just a handful of warriors. He chose Shinar as his capital, and thence he extended his dominion farther and farther until he rose by cunning and force to be the sole ruler of the whole world, the first mortal to hold universal sway. As the ninth ruler to possess the same power will be Messiah. And so these particular items, of which, even though many of these passages are specific to the garments of power alone or to the rod of wonder in singularity, in my opinion, these items, these sacred relics, they were possessed and distributed, passed on in inheritance as a tandem. And they represented, in the order of Melchizedek, the union of the priesthood with the dominion of kingship. And they were, as I said, kept together mostly in serving that purpose. There's only one time that I see them as being separated, and that has to do with something that occurs much later during New Testament times. And that will be certainly a different show. And it also has to do with the the city of the man-eaters. And God, utilizing the staff to purify the town and to restore the wicked to their senses. And so we will go into that at some point when we reach and arrive to that segment of the story. Certainly, if I do go, step by step, it'll be a little while because there's so much between now and then. All right, the prophecy of the 10 kings, as I had read previously, I'll go ahead and elaborate on that again and then share with you where we are in this story because basically we have the power of the priestly line and the dominion of kingship having now slipped from the children of Adam to the children of the serpent. And that, occurs again with Ham's having pilfered these items from off of the ark. But then Esau recognizing, because, these stories are passed down in rumor amongst his children. And then we see that in discussion that both Jacob and Esau talk about the possibility that Nimrod has these items in his possession. And that is what helps him to establish Babylonian rule. And so I will, I'll detail that a little bit more when we get to that segment of the show as well. Probably in the second hour. But that also has to do with the birthright and to Nimrod selling, not Nimrod, Esau selling that birthright to his brother, which is an interesting story and one that, is just spoken of in the surface and not deeply at all. But when you examine it, it's pretty profound. All right, so the 10 Kings prophecy. 10 kings ruled from one end of the world to the other. The first king was the Holy One, blessed be he, who rules in heaven and on earth. And it was his intention to raise up kings on earth, as it is said. And he changed the time and the season. He removed kings and setteth up kings. That's Daniel chapter 2, verse 21. The second king was Nimrod, who ruled from one end of the world to the other, for all the creatures were dwelling in one place, and they were afraid of the waters of the flood. And Nimrod the king over them, as it is said, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And that's Genesis chapter 10, verse 10. I'm only going to read up to the third king because we're going to be specific to this particular portion. But hold on one second, everyone. All right. Sorry, I had to take some water. The third king was Joseph, who ruled from one end of the world to the other. As it is said, and all the earth came into Egypt to Joseph. It is not written here Egypt came, but they came into Egypt, for they brought their tribute and their presents to Joseph to buy corn. For 40 years he was second to the king, and for 40 years he was king alone. As it is said, now there arose a new king over Egypt. That's the Exodus, chapter 1, verse 8. And so we see that it begins with the bloodline of Adam, and that the priestly rite of initiation and ordination into the Melchizedek order, the church of the firstborn, is passed down through Adam's line. And there's a portion of a text that I will read. Hopefully, I have it set aside here, but it speaks about how I actually need to open my book and get that passage, but it speaks about how the children of Cain, the serpent seed, how they knew that they were excluded from the priestly ordination and the rights of being able to be indoctrinated into the church of the firstborn. So let me pull up that passage really quickly. And then, because I should read that before going into the other aspects of the Nimrod story. All right. Okay, I do believe this is it. Okay, yeah, this is it. This particular passage is from the writings of Abraham, and it kind of reiterates the verse that I read, just in different manner. And it also provides additional elaboration which you do not find in the other passages. And specifically with regard to the exclusion. Like, for instance, the seed of Cain, they were cursed to not be able to work the soil, so they cannot farm. But they are the money changers, and they are the ones that establish weight and measures. They're all the ones that, utilize usury, um, and charge interest on debt and the loaning of money. They are the masters of commerce and of utilizing the efforts of others to garner um, royalties and wages for themselves. That they, instead of producing the labor, they control the labor forces. And it's always been that way. And they, as I said, and as I covered in other shows, they were the ones that had established the taverns, even that created alcohol and prostitution and, you know, um, brothels, temple prostitutes, um, even music and partying and, uh, just having a good time. I mean, the children of Cain, they really set themselves apart in indulging in abomination. And Satan really, through this bloodline, he taught them so many secrets and revealed to them so many mysteries, like even that of how to produce weapons of war and to smelt ores, which would create weapons by which to slaughter and control the masses. But, God also instructed the children of Adam, but just in more holy and sacred manner, to combat the evil. Which at some point I'm gonna do a show about really how God is not a pacifist and that he has no problem with killing evil, and that he has mandated and has utilized um, warriors and strongmen like David to combat evil, and Joshua to bring judgment to even like the giants and all that. So I'll do a show on that sometime, probably over the next couple weeks. But let me read this and share this verse with you. It says, "And the garments of skin which God made for Adam and his wife, when they went out of the garden, were given to Cush. For after the death of Adam and his wife, the garments were given to Enoch the son of Yared. And when Enoch was taken up to God, he gave them to Methuselah, his son. And at the death of Methuselah, Noah took them and brought them to the ark. And they were with him until he went out of the ark. And in their going out, Ham stole those garments from Noah his father, and he took them and hid them from his brothers. And when Ham begat his firstborn Cush, he gave him the garments in secret, and they were with Cush many days. And Cush also concealed them from his sons and brothers. And when Cush had begotten Nimrod, he gave him those garments through his love for him. And Nimrod grew up, and when he was 20 years old, he put on those garments. Wait a second here. Hmm. Ah, this is the one preceding. This is actually from the book of Jasher. So let me continue reading this and then I'll get to the one that I was speaking about. I knew there was something different about this. All right, continuing. And Nimrod grew up, and when he was 20 years old, he put on those garments. And Nimrod became strong when he put on the garments, and God gave him might and strength. And he was a mighty hunter in the earth. Yea, he was a mighty hunter in the field, and he hunted the animals. And he built altars, and he offered upon them the animals before the Lord. And Nimrod strengthened himself, and he rose up from amongst his brethren, and he fought the battles of his brethren against their enemies round about. That's from Jasher chapter 7. This is the passage that I was actually referencing, and it is from the writings of Abraham. Okay, it says this. When Ham the son of Noah entered the tent, he saw his father sleeping naked upon his bed, with the sacred garments which had been given to Adam in the Garden of Eden laying nearby. Ham knew that he and his posterity could not bear the priesthood because of the curse of Cain, which was upon them. And knowing there was great power in the sacred garments, he stole them from his father Noah and hurried to his tents. Rousing his family, Ham instructed them to strike their tents and led them away to the plain of Shinar, where he dwelt and where Ham died. Now Ham's wife was named Zepta, and she was also of the seed of Cain. And they had a daughter named Zepta. This daughter, after the death of Ham, led a body of his people westward until they reached the body of water in the land of Zepta, which is Egypt, where they settled. And as the waters receded from off the land, they spread out and built many cities and temples. Before the death of Ham, the sacred garments were given secretly by him to his son Cush. Cush also kept them hidden, and in his old age gave them unto his son Nimrod. And when Nimrod was 20 years of age, he put on the garments, and he derived great strength and power from them. Moreover, Nimrod was instructed in all of the secrets of the evil combination by his father, Cain. For Cain had not perished in the flood. And wherefore Nimrod became a mighty man among the sons of men, and establishing his kingdom, and grew stronger and stronger in wickedness after the order of the secret combination, which was from the beginning. For Nimrod spread his dominion over all mankind, save those in the city of Shalom. All right, I just want to re-emphasize the one passage here, verse 5, where it says, Ham knew that he and his posterity could not bear the priesthood because of the curse of Cain, which was upon them. And knowing there was great power in these sacred garments, he stole them from his father Noah and hurried to his tents. And see that according to this story, it was, in the tent when he saw the nakedness of his father that he found the garments lying there. And then taking them, he left immediately with his children. So he knew how valuable, recognized how much power was imbued into these particular um, objects, these items, which again, in my opinion, though we do not see the mention thereof of these sacred garments and the rod of wonder together, I do believe that those that even in stealing them, that they had kept them together and had passed them along in similarity as a tandem of objects, one with the other. And so that lets you know that, again, there's something interesting too. And even the book of Jasher, makes mention of these particular garments and how it was that Nimrod was able to, in wearing them, to establish with just a handful of warriors kingship over the other tribes, and that he had subjugated the peoples of his brother, his stepbrothers, Shem and Japheth. We know also that um, Ham, being born of a different mother, that he was born from Noah's second wife, who was Nama, of the twin sister of Tubal Cain. And it's interesting because you read in the book of Jasher, chapter 5, that Nama, the daughter of Enoch, was the name of his first wife. And so, as confusing or as weird as it sounds, it seems that Noah, as is confirmed by Jasher chapter 5, had took Nama, the daughter of Enoch, to be his first wife, and that he bare through her Shem and Japheth. And even though it's said or alluded to in scripture that Japheth was the elder, I believe Shem to have been the firstborn, because he had the rights of the firstborn passed down to his father by his father Noah, who again ordained him into the priestly class and the inheritance of the Melchizedekian order. Hmm. All right. And so now we're going to look at the story of the Tower of Babel and all of that I hadn't made mention of previously. I think I can get probably through it before second hour. Okay, this story, I had read a small portion of it from the book of Jasher, and so I'll skip over that part and I'll go to where he is where he takes over control of the world. And this is the book of Jasher, chapter 7, for those of you that may be wanting to read and study this all for yourself. And I had read from verses 24 to 31 or 30, and we'll now pick up with 31. It says, "And Nimrod strengthened himself, and he rose up from amongst his brethren, and he fought the battles of his brethren against all their enemies round about. And the Lord delivered all the enemies of his brethren in his hands, and God prospered him from time to time in his battles, and he reigned upon earth. Therefore it became current in those days when a man ushered forth those that he had trained up for battle. He would say to them, like God did to Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter in the earth, and who succeeded in the battles that prevailed against his brethren, that he delivereth them from the hands of their enemies. So may God strengthen us and deliver us this day." And when Nimrod was 40 years old, at that time there was a war between his brethren and the children of Japheth, so that they were in the power of their enemies. And Nimrod went forth at that time, and he assembled all the sons of Cush and their families, about 460 men. And he hired also from some of his friends and acquaintances about 80 men, and he gave them their hire, and then he went with them to battle. And when he was on the road, Nimrod strengthened the hearts of the people that went with him. And he said to them, "Do not fear, neither be alarmed, for all our enemies will be delivered into our hands. And you may do with them as you please." And all the men that were about 500, they fought against their enemies, and they destroyed them and subdued them. And Nimrod placed standing officers over them in their respective places. And he took some of their children as security, and they were all servants to Nimrod and to his brethren. And Nimrod and all the people that were with him turned homeward. And when Nimrod had joyfully returned from battle after having conquered his enemies, all his brethren, together with those who knew him before, assembled to make him king over them. And they placed the regal crown upon his head. And he set over his subjects and people princes, judges, rulers, as is the custom amongst kings. And he placed Terah the son of Nahor, the prince of his host. And he dignified him and elevated him above all his princes. And whilst he was reigning according to his heart's desire, after having conquered all his enemies round about, he advised with his counselors to build a city for his palace. And they did so. And they found a large valley opposite to the east, and they built him a large and extensive city. And Nimrod called the name of the city he built Shinar. For the Lord had vehemently shaken his enemies and destroyed them. And Nimrod dealt in Shinar, and he reigned secretly. And he fought with his enemies, and he subdued them. And he prospered in all his battles, and his kingdom became very great. And all the nations and tongues heard of his fame, and they gathered themselves to him. They bowed down to the earth, and they brought him offerings, and he became their Lord and King. And they all dwelt with him in the city of Shinar. And Nimrod reigned in the earth over all the sons of Noah, and they were all under his power and counsel. And all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. But Nimrod did not go in the ways of the Lord, and he was more wicked than all the men that were before him, from the day of the flood until those days. And that's chapter 7, verses 24 through 45. All right, we're soon to break, and so when we return, I'm going to share with you the Tower of Babel and his attempts to pull off the delusion that he had killed God, and how he had the desire in his heart to act like he had succeeded in killing God, which is impossible, and yet his efforts, just like with Satan, with the right illusion, one can establish things in skewed tradition and get people to believe as you want, which that's the whole Orwellian theme of, creating wars that and enemies that don't really even actually exist. And so, also, if you have any questions, place them in the chat room now, and I will respond once we return back from break. All right, we'll be right back for second hour.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, Buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia. Light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
An hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. And I do want to remind everybody that later this evening, midnight to 2 a.m., I will be joining Rob Skiba for the 11th installment of our chapter by chapter, verse by verse examination of the book of Enoch. We ended with chapter 46 last week, of which I do feel like we should elaborate a little bit more upon, but probably we'll be making it through chapters 50 this evening. And so do join us if you can at his TFR Revolutionary Radio broadcast. That is midnight to 2 a.m. Eastern. He begins at 11 p.m. Central Time to 1 a.m. in the morning. All right, let me take these questions first, and then I'll get back into the details of the Nimrod and Esau and how the garments were returned back to Adam's bloodline. All right, Bellissima asks, does anyone today have the garments, the vestures, the light, and the rod of wonder, or are they lost? And do we know who the eighth king might be? Those are all really good questions. And with regard to the garments and the vestures, the last place that I find them mentioned in scripture is in connection to converting the people that were completely under satanic possession in the city of the man-eaters. And that has to do with Matthias, who was the replacement for Judas. He was given the rod and told to, along with Andrew, to go to the city of the man-eaters to plant it there, and that it would serve to restore people's senses and to convert them and to make this city an actual refuge and a place of believers. And the rod was actually planted into the ground and became a fruitful tree, and then also a fountain of water. And it was the water, the living water, which restored them back to their senses. And so I do know that, I don't know who is in possession or even if they are here on the earth, but there's also mention in legendary account that that they were placed into the Ark of the Covenant as well. But regardless where they are now, I do know that as I open the show with Revelation 19:13, that the vestures dipped in blood, that is the garments of power, the robe of many colors that Joseph was given by his father Jacob, that and that he was in possession of these items, and that after his reign in Egypt, they were put into the treasury, Pharaoh's treasury, and then Jethro, locating them, being an advisor for Pharaoh, that when he left and went eastward to the land of Midian, that he took with him these particular objects. And that we know that Moshe had inherited them from Jethro when he was betrothed to Zipporah, Jethro's eldest daughter, and that it came into Moshe's possession because he was going to liberate the Israelites from their indentured servitude to the Egyptians during the 430 years where the children of Abraham would be bound in bondage to the Egyptians. And so that's how that played out. With regard to the eighth king, let me go back to this prophecy and I'll share with you the other kings. I told you the second was Nimrod, the third king was Joseph, the fourth king is Solomon, the fifth king Ahab, the sixth king Nebuchadnezzar, the seventh king Cyrus, and the eighth king Alexander of Macedonia, Alexander the Great, who did unite the world in empire, and who, if you're not familiar, his mother was said to be a priestess, an Ophis priestess in a serpent cult, and that she was visited by Satan in the guise of a dragon and copulated with him. And she was married to Philip of Macedonia, but it was known that Alexander was not his son. And that I believe her name was Olympias. I can't remember exactly right offhand right now, but she was seduced by this serpent god and impregnated with Alexander the Great, who became, a conqueror, a mighty conqueror, and he was said to possess and to have two horns upon his head. And so he was called the Horned One. And according to this prophecy, he would be replaced, the ninth king would be Messiah. And then we have the 10th king being the father, and that the father, Yahweh, Yorevate, he would be the first and the last in this list. And so the ninth king is that when Christ comes into the flesh, or is it in connection with his second advent? I personally believe it is his second advent. And the reason being is because he sets, with his return, the harvest and then the millennial reign. And it is after the millennial reign that we have an eternal age where the Father comes to rule over. The Trinity comes to rule over the last kingdom. And that we know that the duplicity of this world, the duality of light and darkness, good and evil, pain and pleasure, all that will no longer be. The former things will have been swept away. Death and Satan and evil and all the kings that ruled and lusted after power and that followed in allegiance with Satan and the New World Order, that they will be destroyed as if they had never been, and that it would be better for them to have never been born. All right, and so let me go to the Next question. Okay, I'm trying to find them, but the discussion is rampant. Goodness, I am missing. I know there was one here from Kieran. Okay, I think. Okay, here it is. All right, Karen asks, where in the end times do you think we are? How much time do you think we have left? A guesstimate, as no one knows the day or the hour. Yes, very true. But we are to recognize this season. And I do believe that we are the last generation and that the final sign of the generation that would be alive for the return of Christ in Second Advent, that he notified the apostles when they asked him what would be the signs of your return and of the end of the age. And that we see in Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 13, and Luke chapter 21, but more specifically in the apocalypse of Peter, that there's mention of know ye the parable of the fig tree, and that when you see its tender shoots show forth, that you know that the season is nigh. And what it is talking about, and which is answered and specifically asked of Christ by Peter in the Apocalypse of Peter, can explain to us the parable of the fig tree? We know it not. And then he tells them, do you not know that the fig tree is the house of Israel? And so the house of Israel, the nation of Israel, being established in our time again, which has never happened ever to any other nation in the world, that a nation is reborn in a single day and given the same land virtually, and the same capital, Jerusalem being the capital of its city, and uniting it therefore in 1967 as well, in that it was that year, and also that when Israel became a nation in 1948, that the blood red moons occurred on the Levitical feast days, signs in the heaven and here upon the earth. And so Psalms 90 verse 10 says that a generation is 70, 80 years in strength. And so in my opinion, which, don't, because again, the timelines are still all messed up and the dating and everything is screwed up. But I do believe that the blooming of the fig tree is what sets us apart from those distortions. And that we are the generation that would be alive according to scripture when he returns and when prophecy is fulfilled. All prophecy fulfilled. And so if you add 10 years to the 70-year timeline that occurred in 2017, it takes us to 2027, 2028, thereabouts. And so it's speculation, and it's just my opinion. I'm not setting any dates. I'm not trying to say this is when it is. Nobody knows. However, in my discernment and my decryption of scripture, that is what I put forth as possibility. All right. Next question. Okay. Lori asks, will we know, have you seen anywhere that the sealing of those worthy has already taken place? In my opinion, that will not take place until um, d- right near when the catching away will occur. And there's no sense in sealing people up now because the imminence of the event is not until after the Antichrist comes. And so the beast kingdom must be established. The Antichrist must make appearance, declare himself as God in the temple of God, whether that's the physical, a third temple there on in Jerusalem, or if that's within our bodies. However that unfolds, the world will know who the Antichrist is. And so when we have knowledge of Apollyon, Abaddon, coming and entering into mortal form, then make sure you're ready and make sure you're prayed up. Make sure that you're right with the Most High God. I think you should already be, in that space. But um, certainly when Antichrist comes and is revealed, the hour is late. And that the then return of Christ could be imminent and at any moment. But certainly that is the one thing, in my opinion, which stands in the way. And so I believe that at that time, right before the wrath of God is to be poured out on the wicked, right before the those that are true believers, the wise virgins, those that have their oil in their lamps and their wicks trimmed and are waiting and watching for the return of the bridegroom, that the catching away will mark and protect those that are his, and that we know at that time that Enoch and Elijah, as the two witnesses, that they will also be here upon the earth, and that they will be um, convicting Antichrist and will show him to be a false Messiah. Okay. And yes, it helps because there's so much, scroll. Type my name so that it's highlighted in the orange if you have questions. Belisima asks, if Joseph had the garments, how did he get them? I'll go into that. Just be patient, sister. His brothers tossed him in a pit and then sold him into slavery. Did he have them with him? No, he did not. Well, actually, he did. The robe of many colors that was given, you know, to his father to show that he had been killed, that is the vesture dipped in blood which Yeshua will return, and it is the same garments of power that Adam was given when he was banished from paradise. And so I will explain that aspect of the story will be coming forth, but I have to get through this first. I gotta lead you in, in the timeline and the narrative, so that you can get the fullness. I have no idea what year we are in. Okay, going back to the story because I need to finish up if I'm to get through this evening. So I'll check near the end. I'll try to stop the scroll now, and I'll go through and check at the end for questions if we have time. All right, so I'm going to go back to the tower, and then I'll get to the story of how Esau had taken them from Nimrod and restored them to his bloodline. And then on how Jacob got them from, well, and who he got them from. But I don't want to jump ahead. Let me go to this first. Okay. The Chronicles of Jeremiah. It says, "For they had said, Come and let us build for ourselves a city, and let us take axes and break open the firmament, so that the water flow from there and descend below, that he may not do unto us as he did to the generation of the flood. And let us wage war with those in heaven, and establish ourselves there as gods." And so that was the whole purpose for the Tower of Babel, was so that the children, the Nimrod and his people, they could reach into and breach the firmament. That was what they were trying to do. Exactly what the United States and the Russia were trying to do with Operation Fishbowl and Project Dominic and all that, and testing the structure of the firmament, where they were bombing it, sending nukes up into the sky to bomb the firmament and see if they could breach it, which is absolutely insane. Because what if you did breach it and then all of a sudden there's a crack or a hole, and then all the waters from above just start pouring into this particular terrarium, and then all of a sudden we have a flood of Noah's day repeated. I mean, it's absolutely insane, but yet that's exactly what they were trying to do. And so they were testing the limits. All right. Okay. Now, what I'm going to read is from the Legends of the Patriarchs and the Prophets. And it also speaks about the garments of power. It's amazing when you read the extra biblical manuscripts, the ancient, forgotten and forbidden manuscripts, how much they share and, reveal on what are concepts that you don't find discussed anywhere in the Bible. And, all these passages that I have contained within my book, and they are all these ancient sources which share aspects of the story of the garments of power. And so here's another ancient source which also shares in review details of these particular items. And so you get the benefit of hearing all these connections. And so let us start with after the times of the great deluge, men feared a recurrence of that great overthrow, and they assembled and inhabited the plain of Shinar. There they no longer obeyed the gentle guidance of Shem, the son of Noah, but they cast the kingdom of God far from them and chose as their sovereign Nimrod, son of Cush, son of Ham. Nimrod became very great in power. Having been born when his father was old, he was dearly beloved, and every whim had been gratified. Cush gave him the garments which God made for Adam when he was expelled from paradise, and which Adam had given to Enoch, and Enoch to Methuselah, and Methuselah had left to Noah, and which Noah had taken with him into the ark. Ham stole it from his father in the ark, concealed it, and gave it to his son Cush. Nimrod, vested in this garment, was unconquerable and irresistible. All beasts and birds fell down before him, and his enemies were overcome almost without a struggle. It was thus that he triumphed over the king of Babylon. His kingdom rapidly extended, and he became daily more powerful, till at last he was sole monarch over the whole world. Nimrod rejected God as his first ruler. He trusted in his own might, and therefore it is said of him, he was mighty in hunting and has sinned before the Lord. For he was a hunter of the sons of men and their languages, and he said to them, leave the judgments of Shem and adhere to the judgments of Nimrod. But Nimrod was uneasy in his mind, and he feared lest someone should arise who would be empowered by God to overthrow him. Therefore he said to his subjects, come, let us build a great city, and let us settle therein, that we may be not scattered over the face of the earth, and be destroyed once more by a flood. And in the midst of our city let us build a high tower, so lofty as to overtop any flood, and so strong as to resist any fire. Yea, let us do further, let us prop up the heaven on all sides from the top of the tower, that it may not again fall and inundate us. Then let us climb up into heaven and break it up with axes and drain its water away where it can do no injury. Thus shall we avenge the death of our ancestors, and at the summit of our tower we will place an image of our God with a sword in his hand, and he shall fight for us. Thus shall we obtain a great name and reign over the universe. Even if all were not inspired with the same presumption, yet all saw in the tower a means of refuge from a future deluge, and therefore they readily fell in with the proposal of the king. 600,000 men were set to work under 1,000 captains, and raised the tower to the height of 70 miles. A great flight of stairs on the east side was used by those carrying up material, and a flight on the west side served those who descended, having deposited their burdens. If a workman fell down and was killed, no one heeded. But if any of the bricks gave way, there was an outcry. Some shot arrows into the sky, and they came down tinged with blood. Then they shouted and cried, see, we have killed everyone who is in heaven. Curiously enough, a similar story is told by the Chinese of one of their earlier monarchs who thought himself so great that he might war against heaven. He shot an arrow into the sky, and a drop of blood fell. So said he, I have killed God. At this time, Abraham was 48. He was filled with grief and shame at the impiety of his fellow men. He prayed to God, O Lord, confound their tongues, for I have spied unrighteousness and strife in the city. And then the Lord called the 70 angels who surround his throne, that they should confuse the language of the builders, so that none should understand the other. The angels came down and cast confusion among the subjects of Nimrod, and 70 distinct languages sprang up, and the men could not understand each other. So they separated from one another and were spread over the surface of the earth. The tower itself was destroyed in part. It was in 3 portions. The upper story was destroyed by fire from heaven. The basement was overthrown by an earthquake, and only the middle story was left intact. How? We are not informed. We will now take the Muslim tradition. Nimrod, who according to the Arabs was the son of Canaan and brother of Cush, the sons of Ham, having cast Abraham, who refused to acknowledge him as supreme monarch of the world, into a burning fiery furnace from which he issued unhurt, said to his courtiers, I will go to heaven and see this God whom Abraham preaches and who protects him. His wise men, having represented to him the heaven, is very high. Nimrod ordered the erection of a tower by which he might reach it. For 3 years, an immense multitude of workmen toiled at the erection of this tower. Every day, Nimrod ascended it and looked up, but the sky seemed to him as distant from the summit of his tower as it had from ground level. One morning his tower cast down, but Nimrod was not to be defeated so easily. He ordered a firmer foundation to be laid, and a second tower was constructed, but however high it was built, the sky remained inaccessible. And then Nimrod resolved on reaching heaven in another fashion. He had a large box made, and to the 4 corners he attached gigantic birds, the species rock. They bore Nimrod high into the air, and then fluttered here and fluttered there, and finally upset the box and tumbled him on the top of a mountain, which he cracked by his fall, without, however, materially injuring himself. But Nimrod was not penitent, nor ready to submit to the Most High, and therefore God confounded the language of his subjects, and thus far rent from him a large portion of his kingdom. God sent a wind, which overthrew the Tower of Babel and buried Nimrod under its ruins. Of Babel we find fewer traditions preserved amongst the ancient nations than we did of the deluge. The Zend Avesta makes no mention of such an event, and it is equally unknown to the Chinese books, though curiously enough in Chinese hieroglyphics, the tower is the symbol of separation. The Chaldeans, however, say that Abydissus, probably quoting Berosus, the priest of Baal, related that the first inhabitants of the earth, glorifying in their own strength and size, and despising the gods, undertook to raise a tower whose top should reach the sky in the place where Babylon now stands. But when it approached the heavens, the winds assisted the gods, and overthrew the work of the courtiers, the contrivers, and its ruins are said to be still in Babylon, and the gods introduced a diversity of tongues among men, who till that time had all spoken the same language. And a war arose between Kronos and Titan, the place on which they built the tower is now called Babylon. All right. Now we're going to get into the story of how it was that Esau had discovered that Nimrod was in possession of the garments and of the staff of wonder. And because of that, he conspired with his brother to take them from Nimrod and asked his advice on how to best succeed. And Jacob basically told him to not attack Nimrod if he was clothed with the garment, or if he did, that he would have to surprise him and to also be able to slew him quickly. Otherwise, Nimrod would gain the upper hand. And so Esau was built a strategy around the discussion that he had with his brother Jacob. And we see mention of this in the Mishnah. It says this, is a very short passage. It says, the garments which Esau put on when he went hunting were originally Adam's. They had on them figures of various animals, and hunting was thereby facilitated, as the animals, on seeing the garments, came running toward the wearer. Esau coveted these garments and resolved to kill Nimrod in order to possess himself of them. Esau, being aware of his constant danger, says when selling his birthright to Jacob, behold, I am on the point to die. And so, what is interesting and what is not spoken about in many stories or accounts is that Esau had learned and put it together that that Nimrod had somehow come into possession of these garments of power, and that having come into power, that it was because of his possessing these garments that he was able to rule over the world and to dominate the others that came against him. And so, as I had mentioned, Jacob assisted him in building a strategy to return these items back to their possession. And so I'll get into the story of the birthright and why it was that he sold it, and also as to all the specifics of what it encompassed and why it is that Esau would give up his birthright. And so this is an interesting story. And this particular quote comes from the Legends of the Jews. I think I'll share this and one more, and then I'll see if you have any questions before the end of show. This will take us to what will be part 3 And it's in part 3 that I'll go into the account of Joseph and also of Jethro and Moshe. And then I'll probably have to do at least one more, maybe 2 more segments after that to tell the fullness of the story. But just know that what I'm sharing with you now is written and put in great elaboration in my newest book. But I am giving you the narrative so that you can understand what I've been writing about and the information that I've been compiling, because this really is an incredible tale. And as I said, it is one that is connected to the return of Messiah and also the prophecy of the 10 kings, as I've explained it, and the battle, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and the contention between the wheat and the tares, the goat and the sheep, the 2 bloodlines. All of that is important and tied to these particular prophecies. And so if you don't have understanding or are unable to embrace a certain aspect of those things that I teach, you're not going to be able to grasp in fullness what I'm talking about here. Because, the story is dependent upon all of these skeleton keys for unlocking the fullness of the riddle that is contained within Scripture. And I know a lot of people are simply unable to overcome their indoctrination and their, there's no other way to say it than their straight up hatred, maybe not of me, but of the things that I teach. And because of that, a lot of people are just not going to be able to get and understand this story in the manner that I'm presenting it here. And so let's continue. Though Abraham reached a good old age beyond the limit of years vouchsafed later generations, he yet died 5 years before his allotted time. The intention was to let him live to be 180 years old, the same age as Isaac at his death. But on account of Esau, God brought his life to an abrupt close. For some time, Esau had been pursuing his evil inclinations in secret. Finally, he dropped his mask, and on the day of Abraham's death, he was guilty of 5 crimes. He ravaged a betrothed maiden, committed murder, doubled the resurrection of the dead, scorned the birthright, and denied God. And then the Lord said, I promised Abraham that he should go to his fathers in peace. Can I now permit him to be a witness of his grandson's rebellion against God, his violation of the laws of chastity, and his shedding of blood? It is better for him to die now and in peace. All right, continuing. The men slain by Esau on this day were Nimrod and 2 of his adjutants. A long-standing feud had existed between Esau and Nimrod, because the mighty hunter before the Lord was jealous of Esau, who also devoted himself absolutely to the chase. Once when he was hunting, it happened that Nimrod was separated from his people. Only 2 men were with him. Esau, who lay in ambush, noticed his isolation and waited until he should pass his covert. Then he threw himself upon Nimrod suddenly and felled him after his two companions, who hastened to his succor. The outcries of the latter brought the attendants of Nimrod to the spot where he lay dead, but not before Esau had stripped him of his garments and fled to the city with them. The garments of Nimrod had an extraordinary effect upon cattle, beasts, and birds. Of their own accord, they would come and prostrate themselves before him, who was arrayed in them. And thus Nimrod and Esau after him were able to rule over men and beasts. After slaying Nimrod, Esau hastened cityward in great fear of his victim's followers. Tired and exhausted, he arrived at home to find Jacob busy preparing a dish of lentils. Before I move on, I want to remind everybody also that I had told the story of how Noah, when he possessed these same garments of power, that in the time when he was establishing the ark, that in the Targum it makes mention of the angels bringing the animals to him, of which he would have upon the ark, and that they all remained docile and remained, you know, manageable because Noah was in possession of these same garments. As you see how they are supernaturally imbued with influence over the creatures of the world. And in similarity, it's my opinion that Solomon also was in possession, because we see that he was given authority of not over the animal kingdom and all of humanity, but also over the spiritual, the supernatural world, and the angels, both the fallen and, had the favor of the Most High's angels as well. And so, and it does make mention somewhere, I forget in one, I have the quote somewhere in my book that speaks about how these items were passed down from David and Solomon and to other kings as well of, the line of Israel. All right, continuing with this verse. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'll try to finish this quickly. All right. Numerous male and female slaves were in Isaac's household. Nevertheless, Jacob was so simple and modest in his demeanor that if he came home late from Bet Ha Midrash, he would disturb none to prepare his meal, but would do it himself. On this occasion, he was cooking lentils for his father to serve to him as his mourner's meal after the death of Abraham. Adam and Eve had eaten lentils after the murder of Abel, and so had the parents of Haran when he perished in the fiery furnace. The reason they are used for the mourner's meal is that they round lentils symbolizes death. I'm not going to be able to get through this. I'm going to have to save. There's an argument over, the afterlife and whether there's any judgment, in the same manner that that Cain had with Abel. I'll share one last aspect of this. It says, Jacob speaking to Esau. Esau said, "Is there a future world, or will the dead be called back to life? If it were so, why hath not Adam returned? Hast thou heard that Noah, through whom the world was raised anew, hath reappeared? Yea, Abraham, the friend of God, more beloved of him than any man, hath he come to life again? Jacob, if thou art of opinion that there is no future world, and that the dead do not rise to new life, then why dost thou want thy birthright? Sell it to me now, while it is yet possible to do so. Once the Torah is revealed, it cannot be undone. Verily, there is a future world in which the righteous receive their reward. I tell thee this, lest thou say later, I deceived thee. Jacob was little concerned about the double share of the inheritance that went with the birthright. What he thought of was the priestly service, which was the prerogative of the firstborn in ancient times. And Jacob was loath to have his impious brother Esau play the priest, he who despised all divine service. The scorn manifested by Esau for the resurrection of the dead, he felt also for the promise of God to give the Holy Land to the seed of Abraham. He did not believe in it, and therefore he was willing to cede his birthright and the blessing attached thereto in exchange for a mess of pottage. In addition, Jacob paid him in coin, and besides, he gave him what was more than money, the wonderful sword of Methuselah, which Isaac had inherited from Abraham and bestowed upon Jacob. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'll finish up and tell you the rest of the story at another time. But as I said, there will be a part 3 probably next week. Next Wednesday, so you can tune in and I will follow up. And I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen. I am going to try to see if there's any questions that I missed that I can answer really quickly. And I don't think there is. And so I'll just... Joseph says, great cliffhanger. And I appreciate that. And I'm glad that all of you are enjoying the story. I do think that, again, this particular tale is one that you will not hear revealed from, I don't believe, any other channel. And it's simply because most people do not read or study from the extra biblical materials. And there's so much contained within them, which I believe all of you should know about. And so I just want to thank all of you again. And we greatly appreciate all of you. Also, I want to thank Robin specifically for the donation to the orphanage. Sister, we so greatly appreciate you. I thank also Jared and Jacqueline. We love y'all so very much. Appreciate all of you as well. All those of you that support the orphanages. It's a great, I can't tell you how far your donations go in helping the children of those, really poor areas. It's a real blessing, and we appreciate your collaboration with us in doing the work that we do. And thank you again, all of you, for listening in. I appreciate and love all of you. Do join us tonight, as I said, midnight, if you're up and about. I know a lot of you do have to work, but I'll be on with Rob Skiba on TFR for Revolutionary Radio. Be blessed all, and good night. Shalom.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin. Buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.